ASECT, which is the American Association of Sexual Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, would not certify sex workers.
Whoa, I had no idea.
Yeah, which is insane.
If we are sexually expressive, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong in the way we see the world.
You can only be the Madonna or the whore. Didn't you know that? You have to pick one.
I have only been in monogamous relationships. Like, that's, for me, that's my thing. I've never cheated on anyone. And yet I was also an escort.
Everyone I know that is in porn is married, has kids. They're actually in monogamous relationships now.
It's woven deeply into our society. Opinions might be packaged differently. You may hear different bullet points in the arguments of why it's bad.
Telling a woman that she has to have sex with whoever shows up on set, that's not okay.
If you're in sex work, if you're in that industry, you end up realizing the value of monogamy and commitment.
So we are at the Sexual Health Alliance conference. Is this your first one? First one. Mine too.
Yeah.
Any expectations? And I guess, like, why is a conference like this important?
Well, it's a loaded question. Where do we begin? I think that sex is the key to everything in life. It's symbolic of how we do everything in life, how we talk about sex, how we have sex, how we engage with it, what it means, politically, and people are so scared of it, right? Mm-hmm. I was for a very long time. I got into it initially because I was a sex worker, among many other things, and lived a completely double life. And I could never reconcile with that. I was always fascinated with sexuality and sociology and psychology and philosophy. And I was like, but, this is bad. I'm supposed to be bad. I felt shame about not feeling shame. So after I was outed many, many moons ago, I was able to bridge the gap and be like, oh, wow, the thing I feared the most happened to me. And then I had this revelation of holy shit, what's on the other side of this and sex and sexuality. And the people that you meet in this space are just profound. It's like, sex is a metaphor for life. It's symbolic of how we do everything. So once I started to work through my shame and my preconceived notions and conceptions about sex and my sexuality and what we are not supposed to do and what we're supposed to do, that just gave me so many epiphanies to everything in life. And then it's like the root of psychology in so many ways, I think. You have a good concept of people being scared of sex and what it means.
It's age old, but this is my first Sexual Health Alliance conference as well. I know it's only the second one, right? This is the second annual. Mm-hmm. I've attended other sex conferences where you are having a clinical or scholarly tone to the event itself, right? You're having a lot of these talks about research and stats and new findings, and all of that is immensely intimidating to someone who comes from the world of sex work, where you already feel that maybe opinions of you being in the room, though most of us will say we are accepting, you still feel that gap, that I don't come from big institutional education. I'm trying for it now. And I do believe that experience, especially within an industry like sex work, is so valuable in sex research and in human sexuality as a place to investigate ourselves. I think that our experience is crucial, and we should have voices in these spaces. But coming into this event, yeah, of course there's a little intimidation, You've got these very learned folks that have put in years and endless effort into reading the papers and staying up to date on the medical journals, and that's not exactly how I've spent my time. I'm getting used to doing more of it now. Yeah. And entering these spaces, I'm hoping to find those connecting moments. Someone said in one of the talks we were just at, we're preaching to the converted.
Yeah.
And so one of the elements of getting these groups together that I find a little bit frustrating at times is we can come up with the best ideas about how to solve stigma, how to solve the world's inability to talk about sex, how to approach society in a multitude of ways to make it more comfortable. But still, we're preaching to the converted. We are in our own little think tank. How do we take it out into the world and carry it into the interactions with society outside of sex positivity?
Yeah, and on that note, Sexual Health Alliance started in response to the fact that ASECT, which is the American Association of Sexual Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, would not certify sex workers. So even if you had your master's degree, even if you had your doctorate, whatever, if they found out that you were a sex worker, are a sex worker in any capacity, that's all negated.
Whoa, I had no idea.
Yeah, which is insane, because the lived experience, again, having been in sex work, that's like a master's in psychology tenfold. I'm sure you can speak to a lot of that as well. What you learn about the human psyche is just profound. Like why people do what they do, what drives them. They tell you things that they would never tell their spouse, their best friend, their partner, their own therapist, right? So if you come from that to them with a place of relatability, which we do, which I think we all have, then what people confide in you is profound, and what you're able to uncover about drivers is insane.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, because a lot of the main critiques when it comes to anyone that's a quote expert or a professor, it's almost that you're hiding away from the actual the implementation of whatever it is that you're philosophizing or teaching, totally. Right? Because you can say in a vacuum that all of this stuff makes sense, but then you take it out into the real world where you have all of these unpredictable variables, and you're like, wait, this is actually behaving very differently than I thought. Yeah. So we've always kind of said that the master, we should actually pay attention to them more than the philosopher or the teacher, because it's just, they're two totally different things. And it's very easy to theorize, and then when, again, practical application should be superior to just some kind of antidote that you came up with in an office.
And the space is so divisive, like sexuality in general, because you get the extremes, right? And you have the woo-woo, like kind of predatory space of like the free hug, you know?
Are we talking yoni masters?
The sunning of the yoni. I'm sure there's something for everyone. Or you get this over-intellectualized, you know, like ASECT certified, not that we know a lot of amazing ASECT practitioners, obviously, but have no lived experience. And like, God forbid you know, confront them in a sexual scenario, they're terrified of that. So it's like, what about in the middle? And what I think is incredible about this conference in particular, and what Sexual Health Alliance does, is like, we meet in the middle. Like it's because people are polarized by this stuff, you know, and similar to it's very political as well.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I was talking to someone, and it was back when we thought we were going to have the panel on politics and sex, and the person I was talking to said, well, where's that convergence? Like, where does politics meet sex? I was like, it's always been political, especially if you're a woman. It's always been political. And that kind of shocked their brain a little bit. And it's the way that we're allowed to behave, what is socially acceptable, what makes you deplorable and untouchable. And then these are the only healthy ways to express it. And if you're expressing it in an atypical way, then you must have trauma, or you must be on drugs, or you have low self-worth. I get this in my comments all the time. They say that this is an authentic expression of myself, and I look at it as a creative outlet, and they're like, that's not art. So the question then is what constitutes art? Like, how do you look at art? Or expression?
Authenticity.
Sex work isn't work. Okay, well, is modeling work? Is acting work? Like, is it like, you know,
is podcasting work?
Is podcasting work? Is talking, you know, whatever that medium is. But that's the thing that is most perplexing, is like, they want your trauma story. They want your trauma story. No, but what happened to you? What brought you here?
That's right.
Their shame, to validate their shame and their discomfort
That's
around
right.
the
Well,
subject.
so that their narrative is boosted, so that their narrative has grounds. And this is a narrative that we know is dangerous. It's a misconception. It's founded in a lot of fiction and a lot of media-informed depictions of the industry, and really of any sexually liberated person. Let's be real. You know, you can extend it further than just sex workers, and so that's the issue. That's my take on the issue here, is that if we are sexually expressive, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong in the way we see the world. It doesn't mean that there's some trauma that we're trying to cope with. It means that, hey, we are comfortable with this, and we want to utilize it for a means of self-expression.
We're multidimensional people, right? It's like people...
You can only be the Madonna or the whore.
Exactly.
Didn't you know that? You have to pick one.
Exactly.
One or the other.
Like, I've said this before, but I've only been in monogamous relationships. Like, that's, for me, that's my thing. I've never cheated on anyone. And yet I was also an escort, you know? And I never bridged those two worlds. And I know where my values lie. And I my boundaries are very stern. That's the other misconception about sex work. It's like, oh, well, they must have no boundaries. We have the most insane boundaries.
So what would you say, one critique that I get from one of my co-hosts of another show when he talks about this, it's once you put a dollar sign on it, then you've kind of devalued yourself, and you're now saying like, I'm only worth X, versus a woman or a man that doesn't put a dollar sign on it and then it's only within a container of like a monogamous relationship. I don't agree with that, obviously. But his take is you're almost devaluing it by putting a dollar sign on that exchange.
Of sex or of art?
So I guess it goes back to the question too
Yeah.
of what is art, because you do, right? There
Yeah.
are pieces of art that you would say are, what would you say? What's the word?
Priceless.
Priceless, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you can go buy something for $100, right? So
Sure.
there's a
Yeah,
delineation.
and hey, I was a musician. I wrote some shitty songs and I wrote some phenomenal songs. None of them you'll ever have heard of. But it's like, it's also nuanced, right? So sex with a partner, with a monogamous partner, sex with love is very different. Making love is very different. Like sex is a whole language in and of itself. It does different things for us at different times, right? Like I am someone that it alleviates, orgasm alleviates anxiety for me. When I'm stressed, that helps me. Most women are not like that. If they're feeling stressed out, then they can't even think sexually at all.
To just cut in there, and I do apologize, Coral.
you're
It's my
forgiven.
good Canadian in me, right? I
So
think
sorry.
To the core of it, we know instinctually the power of sex. We know how mighty it is within us as an urge, as a part of our identity. Even if you are an asexual person and you're not interested in sexual interaction of a physical kind, that's your sexuality.
Still defining
So knowing how profound a relationship we can have by exploring our sexuality and wanting to know it, sex work allows people to venture into that without the potential of, say, rejection, without the potential of being criticized too heavily by a sex partner. So that's a big value in sex work and the art of sex itself, and the value in experiencing it is like, that's, maybe I'm just getting really excited here and cloudy by it, but the idea that if we can avoid some of those barriers that happen in human to human, outside of sex work attempts at connection, then why not seize it? If it means that you get to explore your sexuality, why not do that with a sex worker?
Yeah. So you're talking from a client standpoint,
Yeah.
because it's obviously different from a sex worker lens, because performative sex can
For
be
sure.
very insidious. It led me to certainly like an intimacy impasse where you're getting paid for being validated, and then intersecting with a real life relationship, you're like, wait, what the hell? The goalposts just moved. Like, where do I stand here? And I call that like provider privilege, right? You're like, what? Like, you have this kind of entitlement and you have to switch gears, and it's very humbling. So it's liberating in so many ways. And again, insidious in more subtle ways, not the ones we hear about, because we hear about trafficking, which is not the same as consensual sex work. Those
That's why I'm
should
saying
not.
put a price tag on it. That's why I'm saying charge for that, and there should be a number on it.
Yeah.
It is art, and it is beautiful, and it is human, and it is worth something.
Yeah.
So to the people that think that having this more normalized or less stigmatized or more readily available or accessible, that's actually hindering them having a more deep connection with someone that they don't have to, right? Like, because now I don't have to work for it, and now this is the safer way for me to experience it without criticism. So I'm gonna just do this all of the time instead of being vulnerable and risking, right, being denied or whatever that is with the
there's a balance.
civilian.
There's a balance that's required, and there's an awareness. I think that's the responsibility.
Right.
Some people just lose themselves in it, right? A client can lose themselves.
That's the pathological aspect.
course.
But I would say that's a small percentage of what I ever came across. A lot of it, they were looking for answers. Or a lot of them were in, long-term partnerships or marriages, and sexless partnerships and marriages. They tried to broach the subject with their partner and were recurrently shut down on an ongoing basis. So what's going to happen if that happens? And so, so much of sex work was actually very little to do, again, with the act itself, and more about the intimacy of like being seen, heard, understood. And if something's already baseline transactional, if you're just showing up and it's just baseline transactional and sexual exchange, then anything on top of that that's offered in the space is going to be pretty radical intimacy and honesty.
So what does the legalization, or I guess step one in a lot of states would be decriminalization of that look like?
Yeah, that's what everyone's pushing for is
Right.
decrim at this point.
Right, because I mean, you could even do legal work, and it's so interesting because everyone is so quick to just like blame the right and say it's like only the right that has a problem with anything like this. It's not true, because most of the laws were actually passed under Barack Obama, and I think it was Operation Chokehold. So it's like if you're in CBD, if you're in marijuana, and if you're in anything that is like sex work, so dancing, OnlyFans, porn, if they find out, certain banks find out, you don't have the right to bank, which is insane because these are all legal industries. So it is not as simple as like, oh, it's just the Christians and the right. No. That's not it. It's a lot more complicated than that.
It's woven deeply into our society, regardless of what side you're on. That's the reality here. Is like, it might be packaged, opinions might be packaged differently. You may hear different bullet points in the arguments of why it's bad, but there is no safe place. It's not like, hey, if you just lean left and hang out here for a while, you'll be protected. Hey, if you go to the right, there's a safe space there. No, there isn't. And that's the issue, right?
And
that's why we're fighting for
neither
decrim.
presidential candidate has spoken to sex work, like as it stands now.
No.
So
is it because it's too hard to regulate? So if you do, let's say we want to make it legal, is that opening the doors for more like marginalized people that have to do that? Like they, in their mind, they think that's their only available opportunity for resources. Does that make them more vulnerable to pimps and like to like more of like that abusive side
by
underbelly?
legalizing it?
No, by legalizing it, yeah, because now it's not regulated. So it's
Right.
almost like, well, if I'm not gonna go to jail for pimping out and abusing these women, then I'm gonna do it out in the open.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was in Amsterdam with Sexual Health Alliance, which is how I first was introduced to them this past summer. And I came into it being like, oh yeah, I know sex work, like North American sex work. And going there where it's legal and visiting the brothels in the red light district, you know, it's very, very different. They said, you know, they're like, no, we have all these measures in place to ensure that there's no trafficking happening. But most of the sex workers are in relationships, like, you know, marriages or have boyfriends, and they're the main breadwinners. So I'm like, how are we defining this then? And a lot of them are seeing 10 to 20 clients a day. They're making an average of, I think they make 50 euros per 15 minutes. The average appointment is 6 to 8 minutes. So this is vastly different than anything that high-end escorts or sex workers or content creators experience in North America. It's completely different. It's like, do you own the ranch or you own the cow on the ranch? You know? So to take that treatment into consideration and the hierarchy is very, very important. So yeah, legalization, you're right. It would all be in plain sight. It's like the hiding in plain sight phenomenon, right? Which is why decrim is so important. And you could probably speak more to that.
Well, even, you know, even in Canada, which is where I'm from, you're from as well, they have, you know, the model that basically holds the buyer responsible. The buyer is the guilty. Yeah, the buyer is the guilty party, right? And that doesn't solve anything. There's also a no advertising. You can't advertise for services. Mind you, the worker is not guilty, is not held responsible in a transaction, well, then you have to think about the buyer going into that situation and where those levels of anxiety are elevated to and what kind of danger that could show up as.
Still pushes it underground.
Completely.
Yeah.
And so that's not a solution.
Yeah.
The solution is to have decrim. I mean, it's going to look like if the country keeps going the way it is, it'll probably be a state-by-state thing, right? As we know. I mean, it would be way too historic, though I dream of it, to be a fucking federal law. It's not. It's just that's a big, big dream. It'll be a state-by-state, and decrim is what we're hoping for, right? That's the goal here.
Yeah.
No, that does make sense. I was watching like a Jillian Michaels interview, and she was talking about California because they kind of, in my opinion, like they kind of go too far in a lot of things, and it goes to it's like we're doing ourselves like such a disservice because I don't know how to say it. It's like certain levels of shame or ridicule can be beneficial, right? They can be protective. And there's this woman, I follow a lot of her somatic work. She calls it like healthy shame versus toxic shame. And there are places for that. Like I don't want to walk over needles while I'm taking my kid to school. I don't want to have to explain why there's a half naked woman and a man standing next to her. So, it seems like the way that California has gone is like all of it is okay. Nothing is to be shamed. Nothing is to be ridiculed. And it's like, no, things just need to be regulated, I think. Or if it's like at a very baseline, decriminalized, and like consenting adults can do what they want. But my concern again is just protecting the women or like the performers in that space. And how do you kind of create like autonomy and agency there, because it's a similar issue with porn, right? Like I criticize porn. The speaker earlier today was like, I don't do that because it does harm. I actually like that really made me fucking pissed because what happens when you don't criticize the industry that you're in is now you're not trustworthy because you're not being honest. So if it's already a taboo thing and we're saying nothing to see here, well now you're not an honest voice, and now I'm going to actually say that industry will see they're not honest. They're hiding something.
You're auditing it.
So you have to say, no, I don't fucking agree with that. I'm in this industry and I support a woman and her option to be able to like use her body as art and put a price tag on that and whatever that might be. But I'm going to also say that telling a woman that she has to have sex with whoever shows up on set, that's not okay. That bullying a woman to pass her boundaries because guess what? If you don't do this today, none of the crew gets paid. That's not fucking okay.
Can I just say that I've been following a lot of your stuff on porn and you made me aware of so much. Like I didn't even know about Trafficking Hub, and I was like, wow, I thought it was just this like Texas conservative overview. We don't want our kids watching it. And I'm like, I didn't realize how deep rooted it was. But I was on some ethical porn site the other day, ethical porn site. I won't name what it is. And they have these like these blind dates, right? You guys probably know what I'm talking about. They're in different rooms. Their voices are muffled. And after about 10 minutes of talking, they're thrown into a scene together. And you can actually see one or both partners not being comfortable. And it's like they're just, you're like, and you can sense them not being into it, one of them not being into it. I actually saw like one of the male performers really not being into it. Like you could just tell. And so therein lies the question of like consent and autonomy too. And that goes with all forms of sex work. Like, well, you're a sex worker, so everything goes.
You can't be raped because you're on a set.
Yeah. We're seeing that with the whole P. Diddy thing right now, right? Well, they were sex workers. Like, okay.
Yeah, but that's an issue of coercion and consent, which cannot be attained if you're being prodded and plotted with drugs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the missing element here is like, they may have been sex workers.
Well, no still means no
but
as a sex worker,
you can't
too.
consent if you're flying high on drugs that were provided and pressured upon you.
Yeah.
So that's what the real subject is. But because he said sex workers, the media is attaching to that, saying, oh, good, this is what we can blame it on. This is what we can get into. And I'm sure that's a big part of his defense team too, right? Is just to bash the sex workers and not own up to the fact that he's actually supplying drugs to make consent.
And you can traffic sex workers, by the way, right?
Yeah.
But we need to be able to define and discern those terms so much more concretely because they get blurred and they all under this blanket statement. And it's just, that's where we go wrong in the media. Big time.
No, trafficking is a massive umbrella as far as what that means. So it can be a consenting adult that is crossing state lines to get paid for sex. And it could also mean you're chaining someone to a floor, right?
Yes.
They're the same thing.
Yeah.
How is that helping actual victims? Because the first one's not.
Yeah.
You just don't like it.
Right.
But I don't know why. I have no idea why they're under the same category.
Perhaps it's time to revise definitions, right?
Yeah.
Especially in a legal sense. We see that with the Paris case with the wife that was being drugged by by her husband for so many years. They actually redefined rape in a legal sense, in a legal term. They did because this wasn't included. I don't remember the specifics here, but what was happening to her technically didn't meet the mark for rape. This is
spousal.
Yes. So I think it's about redefining terminology and perhaps being a little more explicit with trafficking, especially. I mean, are you kidding?
Yeah.
We fell into the FOSTA SESTA world that we're into because we were told it was going to end trafficking and it was going to end the distribution and circulation of child pornography. But in fact, swallowing that pill of believing that's what that was meant to do meant a huge rise in censorship, meant almost impossible to have any information with the word sex in it going out online.
Yeah.
And that's why we're in a social sexual revolution. Our parents and grandparents had the pill, they had the sex revolution of free love. The one that we're in is about talking about sex. And that's why this podcast exists, because it's part of that.
Well, and I also think, though, like, in terms of stigma and the revolution, OnlyFans has done a lot there. It's shown you that, like, your sister,
by
your
nearly
teacher.
shutting down?
Just that anyone can get involved with, and you can be a good person and a normal person and have a conventional life and still do this, and that's a part of you, right?
Yeah, there's
So
still an opinion about OnlyFans.
A strong one.
A very strong one.
Of course, but it has
OnlyFans.
helped start that conversation.
To show just how large
Yeah.
the community is.
Well, and then there's the whole hierarchy thing of, like, oh, but she only did it with her boyfriend, or she only did girl and girl, or she, okay, so is she a better person then,
Right.
and she's a worse, or he's better and he's worse? Like, where do we draw the line there? But I do believe that the hierarchy is important. We look at that as a negative thing, and maybe we need to change the language on what that is. But the hierarchy, it's like the tiers of sex work, obviously. Like, there's street level, and then there's the high class escorts. There's the
They're different
performers.
things.
And the treatment of those, the behavior of all of them are very different, and what they mean for your autonomy and your agency, your authenticity. Like, we've transcended a lot of those lines. We've dabbled in various parts of that. I have a lot of friends that have too, and how they are psychologically, and what their reasons for why they entered the industry are vastly different.
You've also navigated it with enormous privilege.
Yeah, exactly.
Enormous privilege.
But that's why we need to be able to recognize that. Like, I recognize my privilege, and it trips people out more by saying, yeah, this was a decision that I made. And then there's people that, that wasn't a decision that they made. Right?
But it's more acceptable, though, to be the traumatic, like, broken bird that ended up there, right, for no consequence of your own, versus being like someone who's strong and in their power and said I made that choice. So, like, you could say it's privilege, but I don't know if that's necessarily accurate, because the one that is going in there with autonomy and agency actually gets punished more.
That's kind of how I felt.
Like, people want to, like, rescue the other person, and they'll
Hero's
say you
journey.
didn't have a choice, so it's okay. The other one is like, you're a bad girl.
Yeah.
You knew better. You had other options. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
You're lazy. But you're lazy. They want the hero's journey of, like, okay, so then you're out of it. So, right? Like, what are you doing better now? You're a better person now.
Right. And it was wrong, right?
Like, God, which is why Laura and I, like, we don't like saying we were sex workers. We're like, because we still do stuff.
I still create content. Yeah. I have an OnlyFans.
So
I have one.
It's like saying, no, we were that. Like, I work with sex workers as a coach. This is what got me into this space in the first place, because I remember searching sex worker therapist, sex worker support group, and there was nothing except for abuse victims and, like, street level escorts and trauma victims. And I was like, what about the autonomous sex worker? Like, there's more shame in that, like you said, where it's like, I have to give some excuse, I have to give some origin story, or else I'm just disposable. Like, I'm not a lovable person, right?
I'm talking about moving the revolution forward, and that means not leaving anyone out, and that's why it's so challenging to change opinions around the stigma, right? Because if we get on our soapbox, beautiful white women with you know what I mean? But if we get on our soapbox and we talk about this, that's one thing, and maybe some minds will be changed. But how does it affect those workers that are in very different circumstances? How does it affect those workers that are doing it out of extreme survival and extreme control by power over them?
Or of other races.
How does it affect minority workers? That's the thing, is that when you're doing activism or considering activism, you have to consider the whole lot of people. You can't just talk to one small group within the entirety of a community. You have to factor them all in.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not a revolution.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not benefiting everyone who wants, their lives changed in this effort. And that's, of course, where it is. It feels like the impossible boulder up the hill.
What do you think we do?
Organize, which seems to be the hardest part.
Yeah.
Organize.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be more bridges built between the communities within sex work, not just the strippers union, not just the high-end escorts union, not just it needs to be more bridges between all of them, and that does mean sometimes helping those who are in sex work but are in lesser advantaged situations.
Well,
than
I guess
us.
if that goes to your point, that goes with any union, right? It's
Sure.
like multiple workers come from very different origins, right? And they're very different individuals. So I think with sex work, we all expect everyone to be kind of the same makeup, the same psychological makeup, their same, catalyst, their same why. But everyone, so it's like, yeah, we have to unionize together. We have to band together, no matter what your why is.
But then how do you factor in everyone's concerns and everyone's demands and everyone's dreams and goals? That's where, again, it's like there are changes that we agree are universal, but we don't know the experience of a black trans street worker.
Yeah.
That's not us.
Yeah. We can hear about it, but we don't know.
Right. So how do you move everyone safely towards revolution?
Yeah.
Towards a better life?
Yeah.
And that's always been the challenge. We're starting to see more community building efforts happening now. We're starting to see more conversations, more advocacy groups coming up and out. But how do we consider bringing everyone in together? I don't know. I'm opening this up to comments and, and replies and emails. Like, whoever has the quick fix, let us know.
Yeah. See, I don't know. And this is where that hierarchy thing comes into play, because the industries themselves are so different. So if you look at film, that would more be a parallel to mainstream film.
Yes.
So then that would make sense to have something like a SAG or a union, where I've done sets where I was on set for 16 hours. They didn't provide food. Oof. They didn't provide a break. Awesome. It was absolutely not proper. Like, it was freezing without blankets or anything, and just insane, right? And you're a contract girl, so you got to stick, shut up and sit there and look pretty. That's very different than something that like escorting or prostitution, and that's more like gig work that I would see, right? So then how do you regulate gig work? You don't really. It's independent contracting. So to that, you don't really want to be regulated, because the whole point of being an independent contractor is like there's no ceiling. You can do whatever you want, work as much as you want, and it's not regulated. That's one of the beauties of doing something like that. So I think what I see, and it's not really well thought out yet, is it's not necessarily regulation, but it's like, how do you protect the women and men that don't want to be in that space, right? That are being victimized and being forced into sex work. How do you protect them, get rid of the people that are forcing them to do it, and then just let the people that want to do it do their thing, right?
That's the biggest issue right now. That's literally solve the world problem, it feels like.
Right, so it's a high penalty on what would be a pimp, essentially. And that exists too in the adult space. You have these people that used to go on Craigslist. I don't know how they do it now.
Camps.
Right.
Totally.
And they're like, come down to Florida, make you all of this money. Like, that should be heavily penalized.
Yeah,
I'm
in
sure
porn,
they
you're
are.
talking about in porn?
Yeah, in porn.
They're still around.
The Hot Girls Wanted era.
Yeah,
15 seconds of fame.
But also the boyfriend that's leeching on to her career.
Right.
The one that's managing, or quote unquote managing, those business negotiations.
Well, and that was a big thing in Amsterdam, talking to a lot of these women. They're like, no, they're so grateful to have someone that sees them and like accepts them, that no matter how he treats her, it's like, well, he's accepting this part. Yes, he's taking all my money, but he's here. And I'm like, no, that's not what we're looking at here. We have
and that's such a lie too, though, is that once you do anything, once you've been naked in any capacity without shame, and especially for the public eye, that you're now unlovable and no one will touch you. That's everyone I know that is in porn is married, has kids. They're actually in monogamous relationships now. I'm like, you have no idea. Don't let someone tell you what your future holds, because there are a lot of open-minded, great men and women that won't have any problem
and similar,
with your decisions.
I wonder if you can speak to this too, but like, I think you kind of have to go, it's like, if you go to that extreme, if you're in sex work, if you're in that industry, you end up realizing the value of monogamy and commitment, and people that accept you in that space understand that too. And it's like, holy shit, if you can transcend that, like, you win. Like, you really win. If you could, if you talk through the jealousy, the discomfort, all of that, the stigma, and that person, whether that's a friend or a partner, friends and partners, whatever, and they stay with you, it's like you realize that, like, the value of monogamous commitment, and the people really thrive on some sort of restrictions. Like, they really do. Like, I've done it all, been, seen all of it, been a part of all of it, and then I landed back at like, no, like, I like a really quite simple, like committed life. And like that gives me a lot of value. And it gives me the freedom to be so expansive in every other area of my life once I have that foundation of trust.
Imagine having like unsatisfied sexual curiosities and desires and just caging
repression
that,
and like
just caging it your whole life and just like agreeing to terms of a relationship or a life that does not suit you and trying to find fulfillment at the end of the day. I can't, but that's most of the world. That is most,
which is why they shame
of the world.
I wonder what if you get this, if people find it baffling that like you're in a happy marriage with like 2 children, and they're like, how could that possibly be true? There's what's the take here?
Well, they automatically call him a cuck, which I think is so funny because I'm like, that's not an insult. Like, so if you're actually a cuck, it's not an insult. Cucks quite enjoy being a cuck. That's the whole point of it. And I mean, he's not. He never has been. It's just not his jam.
Yeah.
You know, those things don't have to be mutually exclusive, but that's usually the first thing. There's this weird cognitive dissonance. It's like, if I can't do it, then no one can do it. If I don't enjoy it, no one enjoys it. So they can't get beyond their own sense of self and their own perspective that they have. So it just must be wrong. And I don't know. It's like, I think they're waiting for everything to implode or that it was all a ruse. I'm not really sure. Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah, I think they definitely want us to stop the momentum that sexual liberation seems to be having right now with like the popularity of whether it is dating and hookup cultures, but living in New York, which you kind of do. You're an honorary New Yorker.
70% of the time.
I mean, it is wild what the last like 5 years have even done to that city. I mean, you're seeing more and more of these play parties pop up, more sexual theater experiences, more of these liberated events like at the Museum of Sex, more conversations. Like, yeah, for anyone that's against sex positivity, they must be really like stewing and brewing right now in anger because it does seem to be building in momentum.
I agree with that. I think a misconception and what leads people to be so critical of it is that they see sex positivity as kind of bullying and pushing that perspective on everyone. So it's like, if you aren't a quote whore or a slut, or if you're not sleeping around, if you're not participating in hookup culture, then you're repressed and there's something wrong with you. And they see it as them being judged, which isn't the case. Like, yes, that exists for sure, but I wouldn't say that that's the core of what that means. When I think about sex positivity, it's just consciously deciding what your sexuality is and then making that choice with like an abundance of information and not just falling into this cookie cutter thing that everyone said is supposed to work, which is so funny because if you look at the stats, it's almost 50% of marriages end up in divorce. And then you take I think it's maybe 53% that last, right? Like last until someone dies, basically. So you take that chunk, well, how many of them are actually happy and have like eros and love and passion in it? And then how many further delineate how many are not cheating? Like how many of them are being faithful throughout? So there's clearly something that needs to be tweaked a little bit, and for some reason there's still a lot of shame or even just like resistance to even explore, like I can do things differently. And I was talking to one of my girlfriends, and when we first met, she's like, I didn't know that you could do something else. And it actually almost kind of saved the relationship she was in, because she's like, I have other options before, and she thought I'm just supposed to be unhappy in this situation. I'm like, no, you can craft your CNM. Craft it however you want. Like open it if you want to open it. Like if everything else works, but the sexual dynamic's not there. Okay, well, why do you have to throw everything away just because the sex not there? Why don't you just like introduce something else to fill that deficit? Because I kind of fall into the Esther Perel camp, which is you're not supposed to be everything to everyone all the time. That's a huge ask. And maybe that works for some people. That doesn't work for me. It doesn't.
Individuation is so important, right? And
but
that comes with
it's
autonomy.
also a culture of acceptance more than ever before. And acceptance means doing well on social media. Acceptance means having a big friend group. Acceptance means not being something that is pushing against the norm, right? It's about going with the flow and staying with the majority.
Conforming.
And so conformity, and more than ever, that's what we need to feel secure. You know, anxiety's ticking up. And so the idea of stepping out of your regular routine, which has become familiar, and it may be serving you nothing. It may be complete feedback loop of negativity. But the idea of stepping out of that for the unknown potential that you could be happier is just too scary.
The pain
unknown.
The pain you know versus the pain you don't.
It's the unknown. And so it's like, I can't make that change because that's the unknown. I would rather just stay in my predictable, controlled feedback loop. And if that means staying in a marriage that's not making me feel loved or sexy or worthy, fuck it. I'll do that because I don't know what the other side holds.
Yeah. And it could be a very lonely place. Like, I've only recently come out about my experiences over the past year because I realized if I'm going to be working with sex workers, I can't come in on my high horse, high and almighty, like, oh, you know, like I know what to do with you without weaving in my own story. And since I've done that, you realize there's very few of you, you know, that are radically honest, autonomous, and free there to express yourselves and your wholeness. But who cares? Because like, what's the downside of that? Like, it's like putting everyone through a sieve. When you lead with your truth, you put everyone in your world and around you through a sieve. And it's like, those are the only people I care to engage with. The ones that are doing the same, that are also like open to growth. I'm not saying I know it all. I realize how little I know on the other end of that. I'm like, teach me more. Mm-hmm. Like, now that I was siloed off for so long, and now that I'm open, I'm like, what else don't I know? What else is on the other side of this?
I'm just trying to play the balance card here in saying, again, it's a privilege to be able to make that announcement and integrate into the world this way, because a lot of people doing these jobs, if they took that chance, could be in fatal danger based on who they live with, how they live, the world around them, the family they're a part of. Like, yes, the liberation in being able to say that. Oh my goodness, I hope that it does make changes. Seriously, that's why we're having these conversations.
Well, Kurt Fowler says, like, when it comes to sex work, money is the great equalizer. Which with drugs too, like, you know, anything illegal, taboo, whatever. Money is the great equalizer. If you're not making money, if this had been my past and I had nothing to show for it, it would have been like, oh, that's horrible. That's embarrassing. That, like, there's no story here. There's no hero's journey here.
Hero's journey.
You know, I'm gonna keep referring back to the hero's journey. Which I'm still on.
Our world needs it, doesn't it?
But so money, but it's like it's almost tacitly accepted, especially with content creators. Like, I lived in LA for many years, and sex workers. There's a lot of high class escorts and content creators that everyone knows, but no one talks about it. And it's because they've done so well in it that it's like, oh no, you're among us now. We still don't want to talk about it. And we'll still bash it in social circles. And women bashing other women is major. The women that are doing the very thing, it's the whole hiding in plain sight thing again. It's wild to see. But money again. And like, I will say that's certainly my case. Like, if I was a street level, then I wouldn't be talking about this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess it also falls into if you're in a position where you have more of a traditional lifestyle with all that. I don't know if you saw, there was a professor and he and his wife were making content, and then there was something else that he was doing with Pornhub. But he got outed essentially, and they fired him. So now it's like a huge First Amendment issue. And it's so funny because even though it is in the First Amendment, people are still really trying to have it stripped away. And they're like, well, it's not an expression. Like, not all expression should be allowed. And I agree with that. Like, you shouldn't be able to just go punch someone in the face. You shouldn't be able to express that. Yeah. But we have decided that sexual expression is valid, and there is like an active movement to kind of get that eroded. Yeah. Do you see that happening, or do you see more cases where this professor is he's suing the university? I think he's going to win. And then you have more
and he was
of these.
Married?
He's married. And it was content with his wife too.
It's
like
censorship.
Like the dream.
Which is so interesting though too, because this is where I see change happening, right? You build bridges on opposing sides. You don't do it within yourself. So it goes back to the echo chamber issue. So when it comes to people that are more left, when it comes to political ideology, they tend to be more sex positive. I would almost venture there's probably no Republicans downstairs. And there might be a handful of independents. Like, I'm probably the most right-leaning person here. Yeah. Maybe Ayla second. Yeah. Where we come together is through censorship. Completely. So we had the left that was like so pro-censorship during the pandemic. Like, they were like, censor the Republicans, these crazy people that follow Alex Jones, these conspiracy theorists, right? Like, censor them, deplatform them. But then their OnlyFans gets their account taken down on Instagram, and they're like, how dare they censor me? I'm a sex worker.
So true.
It's against women. I was like, okay, well, how about we come together and just say, the First Amendment matters for all of us. And actually, even though I don't like what you're saying, it's my duty to uphold that, because when it's my turn, when someone doesn't like what I'm doing, I know that you're going to come for me. Yeah. So like, it's not just for the things that make us feel good or the things that make us feel seen and validated. It's like the thing that triggers us. Like, yes, fucking say that louder, crazy guy in the back, because when it's my turn, hopefully you'll be there for me too.
Yeah, that's
just
so
some
true.
literacy around it. Yeah. Just literacy around it really is what I think the solution is. You know, if you're listening to someone's opinion, understand whose opinion it is.
Yeah.
Understand what it's founded in, and understand that perspective they're coming from.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
I don't think censorship is the answer.
No.
I think it's putting the emergency that is sex education in this country into high alarm and high alert. I think that, you know, that is an area of Americana that, you know, we can't expect schools to have a compassionate and a factual and a consistent sex education throughout the curriculum of the grades. We're not going to get that. And state by state, we're going to see a lot of changes in what that sex education looks like. So my solution is like, can we not just get some ethical sex education that is factual online somewhere?
Yeah.
Online and accessible to all, not behind a paywall. Make it a fucking animation if you don't want to see real body parts, because that's too much.
Yeah.
But no, we can't, because censorship exists.
Yeah.
And because the vetting software on platforms like YouTube are just looking for anything that
and
says
Meta
sex.
now? I can't say intimacy.
It's not
really?
about
Intimacy. Intimacy is blocked.
Whoa.
Yeah. Intimacy, obviously, orgasm, sexuality.
Yeah.
But then you have these creators that are like, I also, did you see the other day when I posted a woman giving birth in a car? And
Yeah,
I was
that's-
I've seen that.
I'm
Yeah.
like, this is allowed, but I can't talk about intimacy.
Right.
Like, or
Right.
positive sexuality.
Right.
Or bodily autonomy.
Right. That's
Like-
our world, though.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge issue.
And yeah. So what's with that regression? You know?
I think so the devil's advocate here.
Love it.
If you make everything okay, again, it's just like saying nothing is without shame and everything is on board. One of the downsides with something like OnlyFans is how accessible it is, because I think a decision like that needs to be well thought out, just because even just the social consequences that come out of that, the cultural consequences, you're gonna have relationships fall out. If you make that decision to show your body online, the internet is forever and you will lose so many opportunities permanently. I'm not saying that's okay, but that is the way that it is right now. So you have an 18-year-old, which I think is way too young,
Yes.
to, especially for anything that's filmed and online. I would like it up to 25, because I mean your brain's not done till
You're
your
not an
30s.
adult, yeah.
You just don't, and you get so intoxicated with all of the bullshit that makes you want to make that decision. It's not a decision made out of authenticity, trying to find yourself,
Right.
trying to develop yourself sexually or sensually. It's I want to get famous and I want money. So I get the right. So it's like if you have everything that's not censored and you can just say sex, sensuality, orgasm, all of this stuff, and you have these young girls that are just getting inundated with this is where my value is going to come from.
Yep.
It's almost like Cosmo and how toxic was
course,
that
of course,
on
of course.
steroids.
Yes.
So I don't know what the solution is. I know some people are trying to make social media up to 13. I still think that's too young.
I like the
but-
age gate and porn idea.
Yeah,
I like
it
the
should
age gate
be.
in adult content.
You mean with
creation
25 at
idea.
25?
I
I
do.
think like that's when I entered sex work, and if I have other friends that's all they've ever done, and I don't agree with that, because, and I feel for them because they don't know how to like,
Get out.
They're not even get out, but like that's all they know.
Yeah.
That's all they know. That's all that they think their value is ascribed to. And I'm always trying to be like, but you're so good at this, you're so good at this, and your brain works this way. But I had so much other lived experience in other realms, like in other careers, before I happened across this. And it was a very thought out decision. You know, I did it to fund a startup, because I ran out of runway. And then I was like, wow, I kind of am interested in this. And it again was like getting a master's in psychology. But yeah, because if I even look at who I was then at 25 versus who I am now at 35, even that is a massive jump, right? So I do, and that brings me back to like the conversation of consent and the age of consent. In Sweden, the age of consent is 14.
Whoa.
Don't look for stats
Whoa.
from me right now.
Yeah,
Altitude is taking
it's
all that.
14.
There's a couple states that it's still 16, which I think is bonkers.
Yeah. So, and who are the people? Like, seriously though, who are the people? Like, you know what it should be? I think it should be 14.
This goes back to California though, and being how fucking nutty Scott Wiener is. I hate this man with a passion. I feel like anything when it comes to legislation, everything is a slippery slope. So you can pass something and I think he has bad intention, so I'll say that. But let's say someone who doesn't have bad intention, they're trying to do something and they see it as empathetic, progressive, whatever it is. You can pass legislation for X, but you have no idea the implication or how that evolution of that passing is going to be.
Fair.
So once it's legal, it's almost like you're opening Pandora's box, and you don't know how that thing is going to be mutated and distorted down the road.
How it affects the culture.
Exactly, and that happens with almost everything. You legalize something, and then it kind of turns into this other thing.
Bastardized
So
it ruined weed for me. Can I just say? It's ruined weed for me.
I agree.
Now it's like supercharged, blast you to the
I don't
moon
need
shit.
that,
I didn't
right?
need that.
Like
I
it's
didn't
so
need that.
far from what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So he made a piece of legislation, and I think it passed to move medical consent to 12. So you're telling me medical consent to 12. Tell me that doesn't go to consent later, because it absolutely fucking will. But also, it's the same people that were saying you as an adult are not capable of doing your own research online. Leave that to the white jackets and the fancy people with PhD or MD at the end of their title. But a 12-year-old can?
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, it is
What's the
bonkers.
logic there? What's his logic?
Because he was saying that kids at 12 years old, you are able to make choices about your body, and if you have a parent, especially a Republican parent, who doesn't agree, well, you need to protect yourself. Right, you need to go get the COVID shot because your parent is, they're too far gone. So we're gonna give you autonomy, and it's like this weird, division that people are trying to make within the family unit. 12, you cannot consent to shit at 12.
Totally, and
you can't.
I was very mature at 12, like extremely. However, I wouldn't trust me to.
I've regressed.
Make a medical decision.
That's 12.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, also I think
I'd have been like, give me Pamela Anderson boobs now, right now.
Yeah, I think we're also like the euphoria age, right? It's like kids are looking for individualism, and they're going to these extremes instead of focusing on humanism. Like, what actually makes you you? They're like, okay, and then we're getting all this identify as a goat or a four or a whatever it is, and they don't know their own sexuality. They're still God, I'm still working it out at times, right? So like, how the hell do you know at 12?
You don't.
And they just want to be radical, because the culture now is like these extremes of like, how do I get noticed? How do I make a mark? With social media propagating that, of course. And it's like, I don't really, of course there are special cases where it's like, they firmly believe they were born the wrong sex, and like, I believe that, but I'm seeing so much more amplified.
The numbers don't reflect it.
Exactly. They don't.
Yeah.
They don't.
Yeah, because they exist. I think anyone that denies that, that's like your own ideology.
Yeah.
But it does, the exponential growth year over year doesn't make sense. And then if you do look at the work, and she's like very controversial, Abigail Schreier, and this is the funny thing, is over 90% of the kids end up being gay. And I say just gay, and I'm like, that's how far we've come. Is I'm like, oh, they're just gay. Where it used to be like, you're gay, you're broken, go to some kind of camp. It's like, oh, you're gay, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost in a weird way, it's kind of like it's saying that it's not okay to be gay. It's not okay to be like a more feminine man or a more masculine.
It's not marginalized enough.
Right. There's this weird need to have a label or a sense of identity with anything, and just saying like, I'm a human having human experiences, and this isn't my identity. The thing is too, when
We're
it comes
obsessed
to
with labels.
right,
Obsessed.
it's like, oh, like you're a sex worker or you're a porn star. Like it's like something I did. That's not who I am.
Exactly.
And my sexuality is the same thing. It is like a life force. It's very important. But I think if you're identifying yourself with just this one thing, that's also a problem.
Yeah.
Especially when you're little. And to talk about the whole furry and animal thing, like that's happening in my town, where they actually had to bring in litter boxes for the kids.
Oh, I read about this.
Are you serious?
Yes, it's happening in my town, North Carolina. And this kid was actually scratching people, which is obviously violent and not okay, but they're a cat, so it's okay.
How old was the kid?
I think they're like 10, and they brought in a litter box, and you're telling me that that's not child abuse? Use the fucking toilet. There's cats that use the toilet.
The child used the
litter box. And we're saying that that's compassionate and okay.
Yeah, where do we draw the lines?
That's abuse. That's abuse.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we got to wrap for
yes.
we'll do part 2, and it'll be great.
Wardrobe change.
Wardrobe change. Yes. We'll coordinate outfits for dinner.
I need my color.
Wardrobe
I need my color
change.
scheme here.
Cool.
That was fun.
Yeah, we were just getting riled up. Where can everyone follow you?
Where's my direct? Thank you. You can get in touch with me on my website, Laura. Oh no, it's changed. You can get in touch with me on my website, thelauradesiree.com, but otherwise across all social media, Laura X Desiree.
And I am at the Unreal Coral Osborne on Instagram, and coralosborne.com is my website.
Thank you, ladies. We'll see you in a
Thank
little
you.
bit.